have capacity, and then we look at calling people when you want to do that, we need land, and we need funds. Apologies.
We are ready. I welcome this first of the new training meetings of the Regulatory Committee. Welcome to a couple of new councillors. We call for apologies. I'm not sure that there are any. I don't know if Morris has got back into. Morris.
Yes, Morris is there, so yep, you can see him.
Or any declarations of interest for the benefit of the new councillors. When you join the council, you're asked to give a written declaration of the interest that you have, which may influence things around the council table. It's usual to ask at the beginning of each meeting if there are any declarations of interest, in case you have one which is relevant to the topics which are in the agenda for this meeting. Public forums, petitions and deputations. Haven't been notified of any, and we don't have any public. Confirmation of the minutes from the 3rd of August. Was the last time we had a meeting. Someone who was present at that like to move direct down, please. Okay, Councillor McPhail.
Happy second, Mr.
Is there any discussion on that? That's a great record. If not, I put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Anyone against? Carried. Thank you. Notification of extraordinary and urgent business and supplementary reports and other. I haven't had any. I'm presuming that there aren't any. This is for extraordinary business. Questions? I will have two questions during the meeting. I'll save one of them until a relevant time. I would ask though about the response to the drought, the preparations for the drought, which happened earlier this year. I have the perception that we're going to have another one. And I'm just wondering what their preparations will be, because it impacts on consents. I did impact on consents last time, and it was quite sudden. So we were able.
Yeah, I can give you a brief of that, and maybe Bruce can talk about if there's any consent related stuff. So we are planning some communications around the information. I think NIWA has put out, Gail. It's been out for a wee while. I think you might want to. Can you? Is that correct? I think it's been out a few weeks, has it? Around the potential of a drought, and as you know, last year that we experienced that to some degree, in a water shortage direction was issued. We, be assured that we meet regularly on these matters, whether that's drought, flood, part of our regulatory sort of watch around these types of issues, and the internal, let's say, drought notification team that consists of a number of activities within the organisation, hydrology, compliance, science, that meet, and we look at what the data tells us. And so we will do that at various stages from now through to summer. And we take a leveled approach. So level 1, we meet monthly, we review the data, and we make determinations on what that looks like, and we will follow up with some external communications. We work quite closely with an external group that's headed by the Rural Trust, but as wider organisations that sit on it. And then what happens is it would likely, if the dry conditions continue, it escalates to a level 2, and so on through to level 3, where we give consideration to actions that we can advise and take as a regional council. So that's underway. The bit that I want to assure you on, that we are going to be doing some communication soon, because part of our job is to alert the community to some of those factors that may play out over the summer, to remind people around the responsibilities and best practice, And should these circumstances exacerbate or get worse over time, then our messaging will adapt to resolve that. Part of the challenges last year were around the implementation of the water shortage direction. And so you can be assured that whatever we do determine as part of that internal team, it will be thoroughly communicated both through to council and externally if we're ever in that circumstance. So some of the learnings of last year were, you might be in a situation where we are looking at a forecast that is saying that there are concerns around levels, but it's not so easy to turn an irrigator off within like a matter of, within a day. So that's something that we need to factor in terms of the implementation. So we're a wee way away from that at the moment. We're still looking at the information that we're getting from the team. The predictions are that we could be in a drought, but that's too early to say. You can be sure that we look at it regularly, and I will be putting some comms out, hopefully this week, maybe early next week, around some proactive messaging that we can give to the community about being prepared for if that plays out. If the regulatory committee needs a little more formal update, you can make a resolution. I can bring back a paper to give you a bit more of a formal. I see it as a bit of it's an operational matter at this moment in time, but I am cognizant that this is something that you're close to, concerned about, and want to have some assurances that we've got the right processes in place. So I understand that. But you can be, like I say, be assured we're meeting regularly on the issue, and we will be giving you and the community some updates around what we think is helpful information.
It's the chief executive's call, not a council call. I'll get to you, Alistair. I've got Robert.
Thank you, Chairman Cook. Paul, thanks for those assurances. I don't mean to be critical, but taking the idea a bit further, you're describing ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, reactionary processes, looking at what the situation is now and then reacting. However, the bigger picture, when we look at some of the newer learnings about not channeling rivers, not draining wetlands, and so on, there's much work being done in that area, because I'm thinking of things like discussion from the regional forum around the re-establishment of wetlands as water storage, and around repurposing the way that rivers work, and also through the regenerative agriculture movements, a lot of work with holding water in the soil itself, bound to humus or carbon in the soil. Is that coming into your thinking as well? Because as Chairman Cook rightly indicates, droughts are more likely from this point on, and they could be quite significant. We need to get beyond that engineering approach to making some more ponds or whatever.
Yeah. In terms of the internal sort of team that keeps a watching brief on that, that's a pretty tight sort of, do I say it, terms of reference or reason for being there, which is to look at the data and try to make sense of predictions really to some degree, and look at the the data that comes in. The wider opportunities come through the work that we do with our catchment operations, factors around different ways of managing the catchments rather than maybe a traditional way. Will need to be explored through our infrastructure strategy as we go through to the LTP, and broadly, I suppose, in some of the responses around the regional forum recommendations around wetlands and stuff like that will factor into our work programs. But I think that the internal team that's tasked with reviewing the data have a pretty tight brief. Yes, just in many ways similar to what we do with the flood.
Well, Paul's directed as an operational matter. It's just that I think the councillors have a concern and an involvement with the constituents. Chairman.
Yes, well, in a similar vein, just after last year, I'm thinking maybe we can do it on our Facebook page, something easy to go to. We had a sort of a drought watch type thing, and we could have a green, orange type thing, but actually have average river levels last year is where we are now, and rainfall. And public can go to those things, and it just might help. One, if we're getting close to something, but also on how they deal with water. It's probably not a hard thing to do, and while we're doing the work ourselves, just to have that public facing thing that could be quite useful. Because if freezing works, for instance, realise, my goodness, we might be short of water in 3 weeks or a month. As at least it sharpens everybody's mind, rather than getting to the stage of we might have to turn off irrigators, or we might have to do something. If people are aware that there's an impending problem, they're going to be more receptive, but they also might be a little bit careful of the efficiency of water use.
If you don't mind, I might just ask Bruce if he's got any. Bruce was with me last year, but also might want to talk about some of the thoughts we've got around consents or
I've
just
got a couple more. Councillor.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
First,
I think if it's any use to you at the moment, crops are in early. There's a whole lot more fibre coming off in the form of silage baleage. So there may be a store there.
Councillor McDonald.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Really heartened to hear that you're having those discussions pre-Christmas. We are going into what they call a triple dip La Nina, and we know that there will be more easterlies, northeasterlies coming in, and we will get dry at some stage. My main concern is probably one of our most important processes when we get to a drought period, which is Alliance Group and the Lawnville plant. They're saying they're going to have 5 to 7 chains on before Christmas. They really intend to get stuck into their workers. I would think, because when a drought comes on, the sheep meat processes go into full noise, don't they, with the work? So would it be worth going to visit them in Don Street and sit down with them and get an idea of what their plan B and C is? I'd hate to think that their plan B refers back to us or refers to a state of emergency. That's their plan B. So all bets are off. We can have access to any amount of water we want. So really concentrate on a couple of those big water users. So I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, and I think currently, as we are, let's say we're at stage 1 where we're early on looking at the implications. I think from memory, I think if we move to stage 2, those more direct communications with industry start to take place. That's notwithstanding the fact that we talking to them reasonably regularly anyway. But I think you're right. The last year the concerns were around drinking water and industry and stock water. So they're part of the fact that the decision making, information sharing framework and what they need in order to continue to work or what provisions we need to make. So that is factored into the process. What I'm probably getting from this conversation is, if you want to pass a resolution, I can probably explain that process a bit clearer for you, through a paper. But it does happen. I don't know, Bruce, if you've got any additions to that.
I think I'll sort of summarise it pretty accurately, but I guess one of the key learnings from last year, as you've indicated, was the value of advanced communication. And we do have these forums with major industries, so there's opportunities already for us to start sort of flagging those issues. We've got one this Friday that Don and I are involved with. So the other thing that I can share, if you haven't already seen it, we got a NIWO climate update through the Emergency Management Southland Network last week, which is public information and pretty much summarises that, yes, we may well end up in not exactly the same, but potentially a similar situation to what was happening last year. So that's probably further emphasises the value of advanced communication and getting some messaging out there, albeit that there may still be some uncertainties about exactly how it plays out. If you can get people thinking about how they manage their own water use and water storage, etc., the sooner the better.
And what decisions we might make.
That's right.
Yeah. Councillor McFarlane.
I think I did talk with the ex-CEO in regards to having a bit of a debrief on the day that it all happened, understanding, because obviously my phone was the one that probably rang quite a lot.
And probably there are questions that need to be answered and how progress. I know we're working ahead, but there's still some things, and I know the Chair's indicated with this management. When it goes wrong, it's the councillors to deal with it. So we've got to ask questions. So it might be quite good to have a wee session just on this at some stage, so I can clear my head on this.
Yeah, I'd be completely open to giving. Like I think like I said, I think it's really clear. It is an operational matter, but also it's in partnership with council. We're in a circumstance where we need to make some regulatory decisions, and the benefit, dare I say, the benefit of last year is we've got some lessons to learn, and we can, and it's how one of the good takeaways is how you implement stuff. And I think we'll be, if we are in a similar circumstance this year, we'll be better placed to implement it in a way that, as Bruce has alluded to, direct communication with affected ahead of time, messages around being proactive, messages ahead of time, so people can be prepared, recognising that infrastructure needs to be managed as well as when we get to those sort of stages. So,
Well, did you want to say something?
Yes, speaking on that, the drought situation for the industry, not speaking out of turn, Morris, but with regards to meeting with Meridian and the Upper Whale and drought, lowering the asking to lower flow down to 59 cubics at the height of the drought. It was learnings that they can pull power from Pukaki and possibly an idea through consenting whenever they ask what they're doing in that part of their within their control. Nothing worse than them asking to lower, and we're not asking, are you actually getting out of Pukaki? If you're not getting out of there, the power, because they can pull the power from there for TY, you need to look at, now Peter, you were involved in that, weren't you? So just, if we have another situation like that and the river lowers, and there was 4 or 5 requests to lower from 80 to 70 to 60 to 59. Yeah. And if we can make sure, I don't know, operationally, you guys, the first question is, well, are you pulling from Pukaki yet? To try and keep our water here, they can utilise that.
Sorry, that's right. Thank you. Yeah, well, the point I was trying to make, it shouldn't come as a surprise to the consent holders or to the councillors. I don't think you did last time. The other thing that needs to be sorted out in my mind is, what is a meteorological drought compared with any other kind of drought? That's what they were telling us, whether people were saying you're in a met drought, which is apparently different to a real drought. Can somebody explain that to me?
Probably can, but I can't.
I'll find out from someone else.
I think it's to do with prolonged high temperature and moisture and things. So it may not be a drought in some places, but there's
Apparently it didn't relate to the water in the rivers.
Right. At some sort of scale that they use.
Well, it didn't in practice.
Right, related to that, Mr. Chairman, good point. Last year, initial stages, it was a region-wide water shortage direction, which was then scaled back, and I think that will be one of the decisions to be made if we end up in that scenario again. Is it region-wide or is it catchment specific? We administer 12% New Zealand, so we've got physically a large area to cover, and you can potentially have quite differences in the state of various catchments. So that's probably another key thing to look at if and when we end up in that situation. But taking Councillor Guyton's point, it's going to become more frequent in the future. So having our processes really well developed and honed is important, and taking the learnings from last year.
Thank you. Councillor Lazo.
Thank you, Chairman Cook. Just to go back to the first part of the conversation, some of that report needs to come through to risk and assurance, because that committee needs to know where the major risks are and what the appetite. We need to set our appetite around what information we need when we need it. So it shouldn't My suggestion is that it shouldn't just come to this committee, some of it needs to go to risk and insurance as well.
Thank you. I didn't mean to generate such a long discussion.
It's a good discussion. I just want to say, I said at the time, we can only use the word unprecedented once. And we must assume that when we get to a really bad spot, it's going to get worse. That's the assumption we must have, and I totally back up what you're saying, Bruce, about that communication, letting everybody know, and not assuming that it'll only get to there. We've got to assume that it'll get to there.
Right, thank you for your input to that discussion. Thank you, Bruce and the managers. I have one other question relating to winter grazing, but I'll save that for when Dolly gives her report. So we have the general manager integrated catchment management report.
Yep.
Consents, team activity and performance.
Yeah, so I'll hand over to Bruce, take you through the report.
Oh, sorry, no,
Item 9, Mr. Chair.
we have to have a deputy chair. I could fall over.
Literally, figuratively.
May I have nominations for a deputy chair of this committee?
I'll nominate Councillor McPhail if he's willing and able.
Happy to second that, Mr. Chair.
Are you happy to accept? Are there any further nominations? I will declare that Councillor McPhail is the deputy chair of the regulatory committee. Thank you.
You don't have an equals one situation.
I will try to not fall over.
Cheering everything.
Consents division report. Bruce.
I'll tell you report is read, but just sort of highlight a few points. This is on page 10 of the agenda, the current and emerging issues. Just highlighted here the commercial surface water activity plan change to the regional coastal plan that's been moving through the first scheduled process under the RMA for plan changes. You'll recall from some months back that related to a desire to address some increase in commercial surface water activity in the Fiordland area. They've been out through public submission and further submission process, and the policy and planning team are dealing with that, but it obviously relates to our consenting processes as well. Quite a bit of interest in that from a range of parties, and probably from both ends of the spectrum as to whether they saw it as a good thing or a bad thing. But there were some common elements that could potentially be factored into where things go from here. The implication of that plan change is that we are now finding we haven't got a massive flow of applications in that area at the moment, but some which previously may not have been publicly notified are being notified now. And we had one recently that was notified and drew one submission of opposition through the public notification. So that was full public notification process. So that's going to head to a hearing probably early in 2023. Flicking over to page 11, just mentioned here the certified freshwater farm plan system, which the catchment integration team have been heavily involved with in a trial that Environment Southland and the Ministry of the Environment are progressing. So that's really progressive work. I'm not taking any credit for that. That's through Fiona Young and her team. But it's really good for Environment Southland to be feeding into the early stages of this freshwater farm plant system, because it's a pretty integral part of where things may head in the future with the way the legislation is heading. So really good that we're part of that. Legislative reform, unfortunately, sorry, some of the content here, next part of the report is a little bit dated after yesterday's announcements from Mr. Parker around RMA reform. That sort of announcement has been coming for a while, so we've now got the spatial planning and national natural built environments legislation introduced into the House. So that's quite strong progress on that. After yesterday's announcements, obviously there's been a range of media and sector comment on that, and I'm sure you've got your own views on it, but it's working through its way through the legislative process at the moment. Some coordination initiatives, we've been keeping going the work between Donna's team and the consents team. Really important that we keep that dialogue going and testing the validity or applicability of some of the consent conditions that we're imposing. Try and make sure that they're practical for Donna's team out in the field. There's nothing worse than getting given something that you can't follow and you try and implement it out in the field. So that's really important. Page 12, just mentioned workforce. Workforce is a bit of an issue for every regional council around the country at the moment, I think, and the private sector, particularly in the more experienced space. We do have a couple of our staff who are taking long-term leave to travel large distances overseas. Had some good internal career progression within the team this year, but we are a little bit stretched resource-wise. So we've made an as required arrangement with the Otago Regional Council to some of their experienced staff have a little bit of capacity to process some further consents for us. We treat them effectively like a contractor, if you like. So all their decisions would have to come through either Lacey or myself for approval. So there'd still be Environment Southland decision, but they'd be doing the processing part of it. We're hopeful that we can keep our as much as we can in-house, but I'm just a bit concerned that with some absences we could get swamped a little bit and not have the capacity to keep things moving for the customers. So that's really a contingency measure, if you like. One thing that we have sort of noticed at the bottom of page 12 is a number of our customers are understandably wanting some certainty for their future operations around things like, you know, what they might need to invest in farming infrastructure, etc. And it can be quite challenging at times for our team members to give them as much certainty as they're looking for, like, you know, what may happen with things like contaminant reductions. Is there going to be a requirement to significantly reduce stocking numbers, etc. So if you get any feedback, potentially that some of the staff that people might have spoken to weren't as specific or as clear as maybe people think they should be. As you know, there's a fair bit of uncertainty around some of this stuff, so we're trying to provide some meaningful feedback to customers, but make sure that we don't misinform them either about where things might be heading, and that's a bit of an ongoing challenge. Moving on to page 13, just some team matters. We had the regular scheduled meeting with a few of the Marine Guardians yesterday, which was in Te Anau. It's a really good forum for talking with a few of the Marine Guardians over a range of issues. And Catherine was there, gave a really good biosecurity, biodiversity update and various other staff. There's quite a lot of interest in the consenting space. A few of the Marine Guardians are regularly identified as a potentially affected party, so it's good to keep that dialogue going with them. Intensive winter grazing, obviously, Chairman has some queries around this. It's been a pretty topical issue. We're receiving intensive winter grazing applications, which are generally moving through the system. We've got a trickle rather than a flood at this stage. We've got a number of people who have registered their intensive winter grazing as a permitted activity through our website tool, which allows them to do that. They don't have to do that. We can't require people to do that, but a number of people have, I guess, sought the taking the opportunity to get some certainty that they have their intensive winter grazing in our system. And that's good because it gives us some intel to work on for the future. Page 14, just referring to a few of the more significant applications there. The Alpine Group application is heading to, there's a fuel lodged that relates to the coastal issue with the existing structure at Cascade Cove and Dusky Sound, and the intention to use that for some further accommodation. That application was declined by Commissioner Sharon McGarry at the start of this year and was appealed by the Alpine Group. That's heading to a mediation session in December, which is actually December the 5th now, in Dunedin. So George Gerrica, the processing officer, and myself are heading up to that mediation on the Monday the 5th. Just one other item, just a small progress item, the Excel fishing application on page 15 for some coastal structures at Deep Cove. There was 2 new wharf structures for the existing fishing operation. That has been processed and consent's been granted. And moving over to page 16, Blue Sky Meats, there's a reference there to the Blue Sky Meats application. Obviously, you'll be familiar with their Moreton Mains processing plant. They've got a suite of consents that are nearing expiry. They've lodged new applications for those, and they're going through the technical review process at this stage. They were publicly notified, but we haven't done that. Sorry, they requested public notification, but that's awaiting the completion of the technical review. And there's some biosecurity divisional exemption activities, which please don't ask me about Bengal cats. I'm more of a dog person, but I'm sure that thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bruce. Ali, did you want to talk about the biosecurity?
I can just very quickly say to help improve transparency and to make sure the right information is going to the right committee, we are going to start putting the biosecurity regulatory information through this committee as well. So you might not have seen me here before, but hopefully you'll see me here again in future. Exemptions are the closest we get to a consent version of the Biosecurity Act. So it was just to let everyone see what consents we currently have, or exemptions we currently have, and of them only 2 are new from the last quarter. So only a small amount of what we do.
Thank you. Councillors, Jeremy.
Just in regards to when we send something out to like a contractor to do our consents, is the cost the same? You know, do we pass the cost on the contract, or have we got a fixed price, so to speak, with those contractors when they're doing the consent?
Yes, Jim, that's a good question. We're using mainly a local contractor, who their pricing structure is very competitive and very similar to ours. So it's pretty cost neutral to the applicant. If we have to take that further afield, that's not always the case, and then we need to think about some sort of cost equalisation around that. And in particular, we need to make sure that the applicant has visibility around those costs, because they can challenge them and sometimes do. Generally speaking, we haven't had too many cost challenges, but basically we're taking the view that the applicant pays, not the general ratepayer. But we need to make sure that they've got transparency around that. If there was a marked difference between what an outside contractor was going to charge and what it would cost to process it now, so applicants could, and they haven't yet, but they could do, say to us, well, why should I be penalised for the fact that you haven't got enough in-house resource? So haven't had that discussion as yet, but it's certainly a possibility.
Just in winter grazing, interesting topic. Just to clarify, they need obviously 1st of November come into play, but technically you won't need it until you probably put stock on that paddock. You know, and there has been some indication of let's just wait till the very end and then load ES up with all this consents. And legally, how does that work in regards if someone's put a consent in, if they say on the 1st of May, throw a consent application in, and technically we can't give it back to them that quite fast. Like, are they able to winter because we haven't been able to process it? Or I'm just trying to understand around that.
So technically, probably not technically non-compliant at the end of May. There's no real case law around that, but I think we use probably some pragmatism around our approach to that. If somebody has an application in the system and we're in the process of processing it, and then they were to need to undertake, say they had a contractor who's only available to do something on such and such a date, we'd probably consider the circumstances in forming what sort of approach we took to the compliance side. This is new territory for the whole of New Zealand, so we're probably tending to take an education sort of a softer approach rather than a hard end compliance approach at this stage. And I don't think that's peculiar necessarily to Southland. I think most councils are taking a similar stance, albeit that the loading of how this lands forms very differently across New Zealand. It's a relatively minor issue for Auckland Regional Council, for example, relative to Southland or Otago or whatever.
How many DPAs have we?
So yeah,
Is that all?
one system. So that they work all right, but we haven't had many applications as yet.
Councillor McDonald.
Just regarding that, if you do see that preloading like Jeremy was just talking about, is there a way of getting to a point of communicating that there is a physical cut-off, but not right at the end, just to get people spreading that out, or an incentive thing to say, let's get going early, not for people just to wait to preload right at the end. And if they want to go, some people might want to do sort of the damage and on the way through. Maybe worth thinking about.
We've done some communication on it, but I think we need to keep that communication going. Lacey Bragg, who's our consents team leader, she's making a radio debut on a series of ads, which should probably start hearing shortly along those lines. Keep getting your applications in, we're here to process them, we're here to help on the project. So certainly everybody's benefit to have a massive rush at the last minute, so we're trying to avoid that as well.
Councillor.
Sorry, yeah, I was just highlighting that Morris has had his hand up.
I've been up to you. Councillor Rodway.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Yes, I wanted to ask about winter grazing too. I'm not familiar with the triggers that require a winter grazing consent at this stage. I guess most of you are, but could you just run through those quickly? And how many do you anticipate requiring a consent in Southland this year or next year, for next year?
Yeah, triggers wise, there's a few things that trigger slope. There's a maximum 10 degree slope. Above that, in theory, you need a resource consent. Although we have got a deemed permitted activity pathway on that for land between 10 and 15 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
You have to maintain the 5 metre riparian buffers. You have to avoid grazing critical source areas. Now that definition is a little bit interesting because it's open to a little bit of interpretation under the relevant regulations. So we've been doing a bit of work between the compliance and catchment integration team to make sure we've got a common understanding of what those critical source areas mean on the ground. So those are effectively the key triggers around it. Numbers wise, a little bit difficult to estimate because people have the opportunity to meet the permitted activity criteria, in which case they don't need a consent. But we've estimated earlier on 2,000 to 2,500 properties that may need some form of approval from Environment Southland. But that does depend a little bit on how people choose to do it, and even if they choose to do the activity.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yes, so just on the same subject, and people think they can wait till the last end of the moment as a protest. We do have guidelines at the time it takes to process something, so they could find themselves unable to graze that crop if they leave it to the end. So that would be a risk somebody was taking. Just following on Morris, I think the numbers will be considerably lower. I think we've got about 3,400 farming operations in the region. A lot of people, I think, will be smart enough to go to some of their flat paddocks this year to get a bit, so it's permitted, and some may well leave that little separate piece out of the paddock and just plough around it, still permitted. But the deemed permitted activity that we've come up with, it would cover a significant number up to that 15 degrees, providing they're complying, as Bruce has said. I don't think we'll get a big rush to actually need consents this year. We might get more going forward, but I think it'll be much more manageable. But it would be great if those that were in that 10 to 15 degrees actually register, because it would be helpful to know how many of those we've got out there, really.
Thank you. Could I just supplementary there, Mr. Chairman? Presumably it would be you'll be able to tell by the crops that are planted in the summertime whether or not they would need a resource consent. Is there any work to dare I say it, do some surveillance of that to see whether or not and then perhaps to check afterwards to see whether or not people have applied for consents? That might be a bit provocative, I know, but it seems to me to be, a method by which you could tell whether or not people were actually complying with the consents by assessing the crops before the winter comes in.
I might sort of also hand over to Donna after I attempt to answer this, but we do have an intensive winter grazing monitoring regime which has operated pretty effectively the last couple of years. Well, it has been pretty winter focused around when the riskier sort of time of year is, using a mix of roadside inspections and primarily aerial flyovers. Potentially, we could use a combination of aerial flyovers in early next year, or maybe some remote sensing like GIS technology or something to identify where crops have been planted. We haven't fully worked that through as yet. We've really communicated, as Councillor Horrells sort of highlighted, we've been focusing on trying to encourage people to meet the permitted activity criteria, so encouraging them to comply, in which case they don't need a consent, and indicating that our focus on monitoring compliance is going to be around high risk activity, and or if we get particular complaints about a particular undesirable activity causing concern.
Thank you.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, cultivation flights have been part of our winter grazing process for a number of years now. The number of flights that are undertaken for integration is determined by their work program. But once again, it's one of the things we're looking at when we can best time those and how we can actually look at other options as well.
If I may, Chair, just to give you, it's helpful to understand that we work in a integrated way. So the catchment integration formerly land sustainability team have got, let's say, a year-round view of intensive winter grazing, whether it's in the advice support when it's nice and dry, all the way through to working with Donna and Bruce's team into the informing where we best use our resources. So we do it all year round, and we use all tools in the toolbox. But yeah, we're always looking at improving it as well. So if there's indicators that we can pick up on and help to identify where we need to focus resources, we'll do that. So it's not a bad idea that we could look at. That's for sure.
Thank you. My question I indicated earlier in the meeting was about winter grazing. Given the publicity around a call from an organisation to perhaps defy the rules coming into the season for a number of reasons, what's our policy if we find there is some community defiance, if you like, to the law?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're often alerted to activities that have been undertaken, not just within the dairy sector, without consent. So we will follow the same process that we do for all those other notifications. We've actually had 2 come through today, which are currently being investigated, non-dairy related. So we will, if we're notified, react the same using our compliance monitoring enforcement.
Councillor McDonald.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I thought it was very, very good words by Chairman Nicol on the television to say that if we see something, we will act on it. I thought they were very good words to use.
Well, I just thought the reason I asked the question, I think we have to give a fair indication that if there's significant non-compliance, are we going to sit back or are we going to do something about it? And the answer is, well, we'll deal with it.
Absolutely, that's it.
I think, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, obviously the group and that you're mentioning, they weren't saying go against good management practices. It was about the piece of paper to it. It was the administration that they're certainly promoting good management practices. They certainly won't defend any bad behaviour in regards to that. So it's always good to clarify what they're not that I'm around this table. That it's, you need a consent, but that's their protest in regards to that.
You were there.
Well, I think, and I think, to be fair, we're not going to be out there with checking it 1 degree over it. If somebody's making a mess and they've gone to a high risk thing, they can expect to see us. And if they haven't got the appropriate paperwork, they're going to be in a worse position. I think most of the people that are going to the protest will be doing the right thing because they know they have to. And at least they seem to have backed off telling everybody to do it. And the protest wasn't against us, it was about the government not having a certified farm plan in place. And so that's what the heat is about. This general agreement, and we're well down the track. Good animal husbandry, and nobody wants to be losing the real estate off their farm. And most neighbours now are going to ring our hotline if they see something bad. We've moved a long way, and I think people are proud of it, what they're doing. It's showing the education can probably take us 90%. We saw it with COVID. We've actually seen it in the last 3 or 4 years where everybody's worked together. And we had a really good result. Still got a few people that may not quite be there, and they don't comply, they'll get a visit.
Thank you.
So just quickly add, we have, again, back to the integrated catchment management, we have the benefit of having teams out and about all year round that can talk to landowners about a range of things and provide advice. And our advice would be, we've got 3 really clear pathways that are available to you, whether it's a consented pathway, the implemented activity pathway, or a permitted activity. We're here to help guide and provide advice. We will do all year round. And we will follow our normal regulatory practice, which is if we see something or get a call, we will attend to it and we will deal with it. As community would expect and as is dictated to us to some degree by the RMA. So that will take place. I think the missing piece of the puzzle for us is that we have to some degree a captive audience that we can use, which are the consent holders themselves. I think we've talked about a regulatory newsletter of some description that can talk about these matters and others, to say this is our useful advice to you. You need any more information, we're an open shop around that. We'll always provide advice, and these are the avenues you've got at your disposal, so please contact us. We're going to start doing that a lot more. It will, quite intensive integration, but other regulatory matters. So I've alluded to that at a previous meeting, but be assured that that's underway and we'll be doing this.
Thank you for that. Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, is the price of a consent. What is it?
I can see $1,725 is the application processing fee. If all the information is there, we should be able to turn it around for that amount, and they get a 5-year consent for that maximum 5 years.
Now, so the cheapest of any regional council at this stage.
They're actually, equal cheapest with Otago, where you do it really sort of aligned with their fee structure. Their process is slightly different from them, but not massively different. They have a slightly different stance because they don't have any plan rules at all. So they're basically they're implementing purely the National Environmental Standard. We've got a few planned additional complexities, but we're managing to work through the processes, and the applicants so far have been pretty cooperative and keen to do the right thing. It's been good.
Well, thank you for a very complete report. Is there any more discussion or questions around that report? The recommendation is that the council resolve to note the Concerns Division report.
Have to move, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Hall, seconded by Councillor Bill. Thank you. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. No, thank you. Compliance Division report. Donna.
I'll take the report and read a little bit of a summary for briefings. So on page 18, I've mentioned the Dairy Top Performer Program. This is in its 3rd/4th year of rolling out. 38 new consent holders have become eligible this year, which brings us to a total of 108 who are eligible to participate. It's a voluntary program for consent holders. Not all consent holders like that. Absentee owners quite like the security sometimes of officers coming on site to check the compliance grading, but where it's owner operated, they do tend to take up that opportunity. There's a high threshold to be part of that, and it is monitored each year line by line to make sure that we've got the right people participating in that program. Page 19, I've mentioned synthetic nitrogen reporting. We're currently in a holding pattern regarding reporting for that holding rate for information to come through the central portal and ensure we've got all the information we have available to us before we follow up with consent holders. Reporting has been low through the central portal, which we've received so far. We did receive more via our own tool than the central, but again, we're still waiting to make sure those numbers are true and correct. Intensive winter grazing for 2023. And winter grazing is a year-round activity for compliance. We know it's easy to finish one program and we start planning for the other. We like this year we're taking a special approach towards looking at all the data that we've accumulated over the last 4 years, looking for trends, hot zones, and reviewing all of the monitoring and making sure we're actually targeting the right items within the program, and working with our catchment integration team to make sure we're all doing the right things at the right time and not trying to do the same thing at the same time. Under key challenges, I've noted recruitment. So recruitment has been ongoing since December last year within our team, with a number of vacancies over a period of time, which impacts on the ability of the team to do our BAU activities. However, we're down to 4 current vacancies. Now those vacancies are due to the career progression roles, which we've added. And this week we're interviewing to fill 3 of those. So that's really good progress. The last one, applications have just closed and we're in the process of shortlisting now. So hopefully we'll have a full contingency moving into the Christmas break.
So as with the consensus report, this is a new addition to these reports just so that you can see what we're doing in the compliance space. And it's actually a reasonable amount has been happening over the first quarter. Most of it was, so the big number, which is the marine ones, is to do with the inspections for Idodenium vexillum. So we just made sure that any structure that we had to go and inspect fit properly into the Biosecurity Act, which is why you're seeing that high number there. But we did also have a boat reported down at Colic Bay with Andera on the hull. So we did have to do a notice of direction to get that boat cleaned, and they have subsequently left the region and got clean. Good. And we also do quite a bit of nursery inspections on behalf of MPI. So the one we did in this quarter was the tail end of last season's. But through that and then subsequent inspections of the plan, we have found pest plant being sold in nurseries in Southland. So we had a couple of notices of direction to stop that plant being sold. All of those plants have now been destroyed, and we were able to actually go back to the supplier who were up in Nelson. And the species isn't a pest in Nelson, but they have voluntarily moved it from sale after speaking to us, so they won't be selling it to anyone else either. They definitely won't be selling it back to Southland. Pinus mugo. And the prosecution is just the one that we've reported previously to regional services, which is the marine prosecution we had earlier in the morning.
Thank you, Helen. Do we have questions or discussion? Chairman Hull?
Yes, just on the synthetic nitrogen reporting, I'm assuming that this is just dairying at the stage. I was reading something the other day about figures of 50 animals or 40 tonne, but my understanding it is specifically targeted at the moment. In some ways surprisingly, but it's not arable, it's not other forms of farming. Could you just clarify that for us?
So at the moment, for you, Mr. Chair, it's only dairy companies who are required to report through the central tool. We have been made aware of a number of changes that are coming next year, so we don't know whether that is widening out to other types of farming or just the type of reporting that you're going to have to produce. We're just waiting for that to come through, but I'll make sure once we know, we report that back.
Just a supplementary, are we having any conversations with the industry group organisations, the fertiliser companies who probably could fairly easily provide information, certainly on the total tonnage? But and how specific, is it very specific this year, or is it down to a paddock size or set paddock application, or is it more 190 kg average across the farms?
For you, Mr. Chair, no, it is specific, so it is down to what's applied per paddock. If you're using the two supplier tools, you're actually able to do your values according to the paddocks which you've got preloaded into the systems there. The central tool isn't quite as specific, and that's designed for people who aren't through the two major suppliers of the fertilizers.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Just further to Nicole's point, it's really interesting. It must be quite nuanced form that we're working out about just straight how much nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen is put on doesn't equate with how much might escape, does it? Because I think with it in vegetable growing or something like that, you can see it being transformed into plant, which is then sold. But on a dairy farm, for example, you'd see it being transmuted into grass, which then goes up through the animal and then is concentrated in the urine, which is more likely to. Yes, I'm just sort of thinking aloud about it's not that easy, is it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, at this stage, it's only looking for what's applied and the very raw data.
Yeah.
There is talk of a lot of change in the reporting next year, but as soon as we know what that is, we'll start to circulate that.
Thank you, Ron.
Sorry,
Mr. Chair. Councillor Evans.
just regarding the biosecurity, the Darwin's barberry. I see here there's 6 property owners would not allow voluntary access to the properties. A notification from a customer at my other job, they knew of someone that's on the property. My response was for them to bring the hotline. The response was that I had to find out whether it was there or not. And they were unwilling to help someone. And in that respect, what can I do? Because it always puts the fear of God up here. Someone's telling you that there's quite a bit of talent. I know who the person was, and they said it was a neighbour. Just need to work out their address.
through you, Mr. Chair. If they're within 1 kilometre of the boundary of the national park, then they are obliged to work with us to get rid of it. Not all of Tiana falls within that that kilometre buffer. So we are aware of properties that are just outside that we've been trying to work with voluntarily. But if they say no, outside 1 kilometre, we can't force them. So depending on where they are, if you're able to pass information on to us, we can happily go and work with them. We're always trying voluntarily, and the fact that we've only got 6 that have required a fire security officer to step in compared to everyone else, that's just been wonderful.
As you can imagine, it's just a wee bit infuriating that someone's going to share that information with you, but nothing. So, I'll try my best to inform more information on that. Thank you.
Environment South and right, our property owners a nice letter saying, may we come around and inspect your property for pest plants?
They have been doing that. They have been doing that. And very good job. So that's good. Thank you.
Do we have any other commentary or questions from the compliance and biodiversity? If not, thank you, managers, for your report. So we have from, sorry,
Yeah, sorry, it was a half-hearted indication, so not the problem.
somebody's positive.
It was about air quality, not surprisingly. And just a comment really that I look forward to the data about consented fireplaces that territorials have shared with us, because that's quite an issue for us, and interesting to see what your escalated processes might be.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we've actually just had a first phase of that coming through for us to have a look at and feedback, update that, so it's very close.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to move the recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Chairman Hall, moved and seconded by Councillor Evans. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
That's good, carried. Thank you. Now we go back a wee bit in the agenda. We did follow a process to elect a deputy chair, but we didn't actually put the motion to the meeting. See if we're all in agreement. So I put the motion. It was moved that Councillor McPhail be the deputy chair of the regulatory committee, moved by Councillor Ludlow, seconded by Chairman Hall.
Excuse me, Chairman, I have realised the error of my ways because I'm not a member of the committee, so I can't move that recommendation, I don't think.
I'm happy to move. Do we have a seconder?
Thank you.
All right. Sorry, I was presuming that without looking
Sorry about
at
that. Yeah, myself, got all excited.
right. Councillor McDonald and Chairman Hall. So are there any further nominations for that position? If not, I'll put the motion that Councillor McPhail be the deputy chair of the regulatory committee. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 That's carried. Congratulations, Councillor McPhail. I do apologise for the lapse in my concentration.
Well, would you want to update on the drought situation on this resolution?
Oh, it's suggested, and I actually agree that perhaps the committee could ask for an update on the possible drought situation in Southland for our next meeting. Let's see where we are, what information we've got. I just noted today that the Strategy and Policy Committee were briefed during the year on what was coming up, but it never came to this committee at any stage. So I think it was just a lack of flow of information.
I'm going to make a suggestion, Mr. Chairman, that it does come to your next meeting, but that's some time away, but maybe it does. Some report comes to our December council meeting, because well, then we'll start to know whether we're heading into that sort of situation, and obviously follow up.
Well, it may not be necessary to come to us if that happens. So in the absence of a report to the next council meeting, or if the drought doesn't occur within a reasonable time for our next meeting, which isn't until April. Yeah. Oh,
You're just asking about the scope of that report. We don't want to overload it. There's no need. I don't think the main interest is, are we geared up to successfully alert? You know, I don't know if you need to specify what you want, or that we don't want to put people in too much trouble.
I appreciate that. I think just an update of where we are internally and what we plan, you know, what we've done today and what we would do in certain circumstances. Steps. Yeah.
Very thoughtful of you, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, we won't take that any further at the moment. We'll just see what happens. There was no extraordinary and urgent business. And there was no public experiment business in this agenda. So in that case, I declare that the meeting is concluded. I thank you for your attendance and participation. We are done.